Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyaus Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantir Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shanti Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shanti Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra Sukhinas Santu, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschit Dukha Bhag Bhavet, Sarvastaratu Durgani, Sarvo Bhadrani Pashyatu, Sarvas Sadbuddhimapnotu, Sarvas Sarvatra Nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Mayeti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So today we begin the study of this text, and last week we had a brief introduction on the book itself at the topic. Although the book is attributed to Narada, both its authorship as well as the time is uncertain for those who are, not that it really matters who wrote it or when it was written, but sometimes we are curious. And so most scholars date this book to somewhere in the 11th century. And the reason they do so is that Ramanuja, a great acharya who was born in the 10th century, and he, in his commentaries, he often refers to these texts of the devotional texts. So we don't find any reference to this Bhakti Sutra in Narada's works. Well, there's another great acharya named Madhvacharya who came in the 12th century. In his writings we find a reference to this. So we at least know that it's somewhere between the 10th and the 12th, so maybe 11th century. Regarding timing, I remember years ago when we were studying the book Panchadashi when in India, it's almost 30 years ago. The Pandit, the scholar under whom I was studying, he was very, very orthodox, comes from a very orthodox tradition. And so when I asked him when we began studying that book, one of my first questions was, how old is this book? When was it written? And his answer was, what does it matter? He did tell me what the scholars feel later on, but that's the traditional approach, is nothing becomes right or sacred just because it is very old. That's just because the text is 3,000 years old doesn't automatically make it very authentic. Or there could be something which is only 2 years old. Just because it is more recent doesn't make it any necessarily less authentic. So timing is not a factor. In Vedantic texts, what they see primarily is any text, any writing in Vedanta, is it true to the spirit of the Upanishads? So long as it doesn't contradict the Upanishads, it's great. It's completely authentic. If it were to contradict the Upanishads, it would be rejected. So that's the criteria they apply in Vedanta. So this text that we are studying is in the path of devotion, clearly on bhakti. So we will begin studying the text, and as we go through it, many of these ideas will become clearer. So if you begin right on page 15 of the book, you find the first aphorism. Athato bhaktim vyakyasyamaha. And as I said, these sutras are always very compact. They will not have any useless word in it. So it's very, very, very compact. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4 words here actually. Athato is actually, it's not one word. It's 2 words. Often in Sanskrit, as I believe also in German, but I don't know German, sometimes they just kind of join words. And then, any of you know German here? So there's a lot of joining of words, right? And so in Sanskrit is a little bit like that. So athato actually is atha and ato. So atha plus ato becomes athato. And you can see the translation, now therefore we shall explain devotion to God. So here, atha, the word atha means now. Ato, so really is ataha, means therefore. Bhaktim, devotion to God. Vyakyasyamaha, we shall explain, we shall comment upon. So that's the beginning. Now, many of these classical texts, and especially the aphorisms, this is a very standard way of beginning. In the Brahma Sutras, which are the, sutra literature in Vedanta, it begins with Athato Brahma Jitnyasa. Now therefore, we begin inquiry into the nature of Brahman, or inquiry into Brahman. So this now therefore seems to be a kind of a standard way of beginning these texts. And therefore, every word, as I said in it, is meaningful. No word is useless. And so every word should have some meaning. So atha, now. What does the word now here refer to? And what now here means is that now that some preliminary conditions have been fulfilled, we can begin the study. So the word now stands for the fulfillment of some of the basic preliminary conditions before we begin any study. Now, what are those conditions? Oftentimes these are fourfold. The word that gets used in Sanskrit is called anubandha. And these 4 preliminaries are, first of all, who is fit to study this text? Who is fit for this book? The second is, what is the condition? What is the subject? What is the subject that is being studied? The third is sambandha, connection, relationship. So if I'm the one who is now studying this subject, how am I connected with this? What is the connection of me to the subject being studied? And prayojanam. Prayojanam finally means, what do I hope to get out of it? And I think you can see how it's a very common sense approach. Before we undertake any activity, any study, we should know why we are doing it. First of all, we should know whether whether we can do it, whether we want to do it, and why do we want it, and what do I hope to get out of it. We don't want to be on a horseback. Sometimes they tell the story of a person galloping away on a horseback. And one person was standing by the roadside. He asked this person, "Hey, where are you going?" And that person said, "I don't know, ask the horse." That we don't want our condition to be like that. Unfortunately, and this is terrifying, for a great many people in the world, that is exactly the condition. We are sitting on this, if life itself, the world itself is seen as a horse, and we're just kind of sitting on it, and we are just getting carried away by the events, forces that are operating in this world. How many of us feel that my life is under my control? How many of us feel a sense of purpose, that this life in which I find myself now, where is this life taking me? what is the goal that I'm striving for? Is there a goal? And if there is a goal, the way my life is going, what are the chances of me reaching that goal? Now, we may not always have answers to these questions, but not many people even ask that question. They're just kind of sitting on the horse, and the horse is galloping away, and wherever the horse wants. And that's why now means, first let's make sure that these questions are answered. So what is the first question? Fitness. Who is fit for the path of devotion? Again, as you can understand, as everything in life, there is no one answer to this question. There are some people who believe that certain conditions have to be fulfilled. Some people who believe the reason the path of devotion is sometimes, and in my view, probably not very accurately, described as the easiest of all paths, the easiest of all yogas, because they say, well, these other yogas, whether it's Jnana Yoga, Raja Yoga, etc., will need some preparation, some fitness. But love God, well, it's so easy to love God. You don't need to prepare for it. So that's one view. At the very least, we can say, in a very general terms, in order for us to be ready, so to speak, to undertake any activity, any study, the first thing is we must have desire for it. I mean, why would we even take up this study if we had no interest in the subject whatsoever? It's like on Wednesday evenings, I'm getting bored and I don't know what else I could do at this time of the week. So let me just go and sit there. Well, I'm sure that none of you does that. But unless we had some interest in the subject, why would we even invest our time and energy into it? So there is that desire to study, desire to know is present. The second thing is capacity. Or any kind of investment of time and energy will bring some results if I have capacity for whatever study I'm undertaking or whatever practice I'm undertaking. So we then need to know, do I have the capacity to undergo whatever this practice demands? And a third thing is opportunity. Sometimes we may have the desire, we may have the capacity, but an opportunity may not come in life. And then if we have all these three, then really this study there is a chance that this study will become more fruitful. The motivation is important also, because it's possible that we can undertake a study of this text purely out of academic interest. It's like, I'm just curious, what does this book say? And that's a legitimate motivation. And so one can say, I just want to know what it is. Another motivation to study would be, not only do I want to know, if it makes sense, then I want to somehow relate it to my own life. That somehow this book or this study or this subject can bring about inner transformation. It can help me go nearer to my spiritual ideal. Now, in order for that motive to become prominent, we must have a certain, at least a starting faith, or at least some amount of accepting the validity of this text, or validity of the investment of our time and energy into the study, at least as a working hypothesis, that there is a possibility that this book may have something important for me. So these are kind of basic requirements even before we begin the study. And then, of course, the subject. The subject is love for God, the path of devotion, the path of love. Connection. Well, connection is between looking at this text as a book It's between the reader and the text that is being read. But in a deeper level, it's of a spiritual seeker and the teaching. So I'm a student and there's a teaching. So that's how I'm connected with this, with the act of studying the text. And prayojana means purpose. What do I hope to get out of it? Again, that's not the answer that anybody else should tell you. It's something that you have to ask for yourself. Some people would be just satisfied in saying, well, if I can get a little bit of understanding from it, I would think the study is successful. Some others might say, well, I'm not satisfied with simply intellectual understanding. I would want this study to kind of enter into my own being or somehow get integrated with my present spiritual practice so that I become a better human being. I become a better spiritual seeker. That this takes me nearer to my spiritual goal. So these are the different kinds of way the purpose of this study can be described. Now, I said before that according to some people, bhakti is such an open door that there is no stringent requirement for its to be eligible for its study. So they believe that the word atha, which is translated as now, just stands for to denote auspiciousness. Because in Sanskrit, om is one word, sound, which is often invoked in the beginning because it's auspicious. The word atha in Sanskrit is also another word that is considered auspicious. To begin any text with atha is considered an auspicious thing to do. Then we come to the next word, ato. Ataha means therefore. Now therefore sometimes is described as what Narada is doing, the author here is doing is that the author is convinced of the utility of this subject. Not only that, the author is at some level, according to some, feels that this path has some distinct advantages over other paths. In some ways it is superior to other paths, which is why the author has undertaken a study and writing of this text, and therefore really stands also for the reason the author has undertaken study of this text. And we shall explain devotion to God. The term vyakyasyama, vyakhyana in Sanskrit also means a commentary. And so one way of understanding this would be that the topic of bhakti or devotion is not new, that it's already been expounded in older texts such as the Gita, the Bhagavata and others. So what this author is saying is, what I present here is a commentary on the topic that's already been discussed in more ancient texts. Or it could mean a commentary on the experiences of devotees of God, experiences of people who have actually had this intense love for God, or the author himself. So that's how this word vyakyasyamaha. Now therefore we shall explain devotion to God. That's how the first aphorism. We now go to the second one. Come to page 21. Please, if you have not done so, I would encourage you sometime during the week, read this commentary of Swami Bhuteshananda Ji. It's very, very enlightening. So although we will not be reading the commentary itself line by line here, I would encourage you to do it as a form of your personal study. So the second aphorism on page 21. Just like we did for Gita, would you like to repeat after me? Okay, let's do that. So let's do the first aphorism also, since we turned to it. Athato bhaktim vyakyasyamaha. Okay, now the second one on page 21. Sa tvasmin parama prema rupa. So oftentimes what they do in the sutra literature is the way they shorten it, have these very short sayings, is they'll use a lot more pronouns. So since the word bhakti has been used in the first sentence, although in the translation you will find bhakti has been described as the supreme love toward God, there is no word bhakti in the aphorism itself. The aphorism simply says sa. Sa means that. So it's like that has been described as the supreme love toward God. And that here means bhakti, because bhakti is the preceding sentence. And that's how we use pronouns, right, in common language. First I say, Narada Bhakti Sutra is a great book. It is wonderful. Now, when I say it refers to this because it's immediately succeeding sentence. So that's how the word sa means here, bhakti. Tu asmin parama prema rupa. Now, asmin, although again, the translation is not a literal translation here. The translation kind of gives the sense, not so much a word by word translation here. Because here, asmin is actually a neuter gender. So essentially, the author is not taking any stance towards the nature of God. Although again, in translation, you'll find towards him and God. In the Sanskrit itself, there is neither him nor God, just mean that. So again, the Narada here himself is not staking out a position whether God is a he or a she or even the term. He's just saying asmin. Parama prema rupa, he described the supreme love toward God. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, but we'll go step by step. Just as sometimes when we begin in school, one of the first introductory studies, say, on the subject of light in physics, you say, light travels in a straight line. And for most of us, when we are very young, that's a very satisfactory answer and satisfactory understanding. But then, of course, when we grow older, we kind of look, a straight line, is it really straight? How straight is it? And say, oh, no, it's not really straight. It's kind of, waveform. But what is it really? Is it just energy just flowing, or is it like packets of energy, or what is it exactly? So we then keep on asking subtle questions about a very simple statement like light travels in a straight line. And so the more deeply you look into something, you get to see the subtle distinctions, the subtle details which are not very apparent with a preliminary study. Love is a little bit like that. Because bhakti would seem like, well, what is there to do? Just love God. God is love, and you love God. But it's not so simple as that. When we kind of begin to look deeply, a lot of questions can come in the mind. That what does love really mean? There are scholars who have wrestled with this, and there is no one specific answer to that one. We know the only, besides the Atman, the only two things that we seem to have right now is the body and the mind. And then, of course, there is the spirit. And if the nature of that spirit is love, how does this love manifest? Now, we know at the physical level, there are various ways love gets expressed. There are many different ways. How does love express itself through mind? And And so then the question that's asked is love a kind of feeling? Is love a feeling? Is love a kind of emotion? Or is love identical with knowledge? Or is love a kind of willpower? We know, or actually all of these three things are kind of, you'll find attributes of all these three in love. We know, for instance, that like knowledge, love can increase our clarity. We know that there's a total stranger you see on the street. You don't know anything about that person. And so that you have some knowledge, well, that's a human being. Then when you get to know the person and then develop affection and love for the person, the more you love someone, the more you get to know the person. So love can be seen as a kind of knowledge. We also know that love generates some strong emotions and feelings within us. And so it's not unreasonable to ask whether love itself is a form of emotion. And it does share a lot of characteristics of the other emotions that we have. We also know that the presence of love has produced great determination, great firmness, great resolve. A tremendous amount of willpower can get unleashed through love. For love or because of love, people are willing to undertake any hardship, willing to do what they otherwise wouldn't have done. Exactly the kind of characteristics that are manifested through willpower. And so here there's a question. Again, as I said, if you look deeply, these are the kind of questions that can come. Is love an emotion? Is love knowledge? Is love a kind of willpower? So what Narada is saying here is, first of all, it's supreme. It's not just, again, love is something we all experience. But among all the different kinds of loves that we have in life, this love is the supreme. It's somehow higher. Now, higher or supreme or intense is not simply in terms of quantity. It's like, yeah, we love other things, but I love these things more. They said a little child was once asked, some guests had arrived, and they asked the little boy, you like your dad more or you like your mom more? And the child thought they asked, you love your dad more or you love your mom more? And the little child thought for a moment and said, I like my dad, I like my mom, but I love ice cream. So we know there are things we like and there are things we love, and there are things we love a lot, and there are other things we love very intensely. So there is always these gradations in love. And so the word supreme here means the love for God, the bhakti, devotion surpasses all the loves that we have experienced in life so far. Whether it's for places, people, things, objects, whatever love we have experienced, bhakti or devotion surpasses that, not only in its intensity, but also in quality. Now this is something very important to know. What does it mean? How is love for God different from love for anything else? One way of describing this would be that love for God is totally selfless. That would raise a question, rightfully, is, well, what about other loves we have in life? Are they not selfless? And a rather blunt answer to that is no, they're not selfless. The reason is the self is involved in all other loves that we have. It's a kind of selfishness, but not the gross kind of selfishness. It's very subtle. It's so subtle that it's very easy to miss it. For one thing, let's look at it this way. We might think, well, what about a mother's love for her child? How can anyone say that it's not unselfish? Well, yes, as I said, probably among all the loves that we have, a mother's love for her baby might be probably come closest to unselfishness. But even there, the self is involved. A mother doesn't love just any baby in the world. A mother loves her baby because her baby. You see, that if someone can reach a stage and say, well, I love all children. People say that. I make no distinction between my children and other children, but there'll always be some difference because this is like your child. As with regard to our friends, our parents, whatever, somehow those who we see as mine are somehow a little bit more special than the generic. There are so many fathers, so many mothers, so many friends in the world. But still, my friends, my family could be somehow more special to me. Not just generic, oh, I love all families. Of course we can love. It doesn't mean we hate other families, but somehow our family will be special. So somehow this self, me, is involved. There is this very often quoted passage in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which says that a child is dear to the mother, not for the child's sake, but for the sake of the self. A husband is dear to the wife, not for the sake of the husband, but for the sake of the self. A wife is dear to the husband, not for the sake of the husband, but because of the self. And so on. And pretty much it ends up by saying, everything in the world is dear to us, not for that thing, but because of the self. Now, this verse has been interpreted in two ways. And one way is that wherever we feel love, wherever we feel that they feel the kind of dearness, something is very dear to me, it's because the same Atman, the same spirit, the same divine that is in my heart is in the heart of that object or person or place in front of me. And because of the presence, and that divine is not different, that's why I feel that sense of connection. That's one way of describing it. But on the other hand, I'm sorry. On the other hand, this divine is present in the heart of all. But I just feel something special in some people's divine than in the other people. And that something special is that sense that, well, somehow this is mine, a sense of belonging, a sense of possessiveness. So somehow appropriating something as me or mine makes it slightly bit selfish. On the other hand, when we pray to God, of course we have our personal connection with God, but if someone loves God, it's like, I love this God because this is my God, as opposed to some other God. If we think that way, then even that love is selfish. But usually, when seekers of the highest reality, when devotees of God, they love God, they pray to God, they worship God, they know that infinite being belongs to all. It's not like my personal possession. And in spite of that, I just feel this love. And therefore, that's the difference between love for God and love for anyone or anything else in this world. Because only that love for God can be completely selfless, absolutely selfless. But love for anything other than God, philosophically and in practice, will have the self involved in however subtle a way. And that's another reason why he describes here as the supreme love toward God. In some ways, as we continue study of this text, you will see that the path of love, the path of bhakti, is in some sense not very different from the fourfold path that the Buddha taught. Except that you are approaching the reality, you are looking at it from one way, maybe a somewhat what might appear as a negative way of looking at it, and a positive way of looking at the same reality. And so Buddha looked at it in one way, and what he saw underlying the human condition was existential suffering. And that's why in the four noble truths that the Buddha taught, the first one was existence of sorrow or suffering. And we have seen earlier that here by sorrow, Buddha is not referring to just the superficial sorrows that we have in life, which are real, which are painful, but they are not universal in the sense that not everyone is afflicted by it. The sorrow and suffering caused by hunger, by homelessness. Right now, even as we speak, we know there's this Hurricane Maria, which is causing havoc in the Caribbean, and now it's in Puerto Rico. So that sorrow and suffering is very real. That cannot be denied. But that's not the sorrow and suffering that the Buddha refers to when he says that sorrow exists. He's referring to a more subtler kind of sorrow, something which not too many people pay attention to, although they are suffering from it. Because so much of our attention is taken over by these immediate causes of sorrow that very few of us have the luxury or the privilege or even the interest in looking at the subtler, deeper kinds of sorrow. The sorrow associated with mortality. Just this constant anxiety which we try to suppress, which we try not to think about, is this fear of, I don't want to die. So there is this anxiety related to death, anxiety related to the process of aging, and anxiety related to sickness. And we really have no control over it. You can try to postpone it as much as you can. No matter how much care we take, we are going to fall sick sometime or the other. No matter how much we try to hide it, whether we like it or not, we are aging day by day, moment by moment. You cannot stop it. You can try to hide it up to a point, but you cannot stop it. And of course, death. Now, the anxieties associated with these, that's the dukkha, that's the suffering that Buddha is referring to. So he said the existence of sorrow, very true, very real. Then he said, well, there is a cause of sorrow. There is a reason why this basic suffering occurs in life. And a third truth was the cause of sorrow he identified with tanha or desire. And the third truth was that sorrow can end. It's not something that we are helpless against, that there is a way out. There is a cessation of sorrow. And finally he says, the way to eliminate that sorrow,
to which then the Buddha presented the Eightfold Path. There is the existence of sorrow, there is a cause of it, it can end, and then the Buddha gave the way to end it. Now, in the path of bhakti, you could also say, well, there are 4 noble bhakti truths, and you're coming at it from a different side. And first is existence of love. That in life, there is love. And just as it is possible to not be able to notice this subtle existential sorrow because we are preoccupied with this sorrows of daily life, in the same way, it's possible not to be aware of this deeper existential love present in life because we are busy with all the superficial loves in life, whether it's a love for a particular food or a place or a person. These are the kind of loves which keep us engaged, and therefore we miss the presence of this deep, very profound and subtle love present. And so, first, existence of love. Second, there is a source of love. From where does this love come? And Bhakti identifies this love as originating from God. Or in Vedantic terms, from the Atman, from the Spirit. Spirit is love itself. And that's why you can understand now the meaning of God is love. But God is love is meant that whatever love is present in life has only one source, and it comes from God. Again, primarily it is this deep underlying love. And on top are the kind of love that we experience on a daily basis. Those are only kind of a very pale reflection, a pale shadow of this true love, which is very subtle, very profound, very deep. Third, fulfillment through love. So this love can lead to fulfillment. And finally, the way to experience that fulfillment. And the way to experience that fulfillment is through love of God. Now that raises another one very interesting point. The means in the path of love, the practice is to love God. Well, if the practice is to love God, what is the result? What happens after I practice love for God? What do I get? And the answer is, well, you get love for God. So that's interesting that we have to practice love in order then finally to experience love. So there is a love as a means, and according to some, love is the end itself. And then, of course, there are things we will see later on, whether that love which is the end is any different from the knowledge which is the end. Or it's just that we are using two different terms because we are looking at the same thing from two different angles or two different perspectives. One final point before I close. Bhakti in the highest sense of the term. Again, just by the fact that I'm using the adjective highest sense of the term, you can understand, well, there is a lower sense of the term in which bhakti is used also. But the highest level of bhakti, highest level of love would be that I love God because I love God. And that would be God being the object of my love. But God can also be a means to an object. So I might say, what I really want is to be happy in life. I want to be happy. I want to be free from all suffering. And someone said, if you love God, I can be really happy in life. And so I'm going to love God because I want to be happy. And that's not bad. That's great. But again, here my goal is not God. My goal is my happiness. So there is this self involved there. and I use bhakti as a means to attaining some other goal. And therefore, that is considered a lower form of love. If I use love as a means to something else, as a means to some other objective, then that love is not, well, it's love, but kind of a lower category. But the highest love would be, I love God because I love God. Because we know, we read about such things. We have seen probably cases of it among the people we know, that sometimes if someone experiences a lot of suffering in life or has a major catastrophe, they say, I'm going to stop going to church. I'm not going to pray. What's the point? I prayed so much and this is what God did to me. I'm not going to do it. I mean, at one level you can understand the reasoning behind it. But what it also meant was, it was a transaction. Like, I go regularly to temple or church, I pray daily, I do a lot of japa. In return, God has to keep me happy and see that everything goes well. If God doesn't do it, I'm not going to do this. So I give this to God and God gives that to me. Well, that's shopkeeping. Swami Vivekananda called it sanctified shopkeeping. And so bhakti, therefore, can't be that I give this and in return, as if like, well, God is like, oh my God, you're not going to pray for me. I better do something for you. So these are the different ways going forward, we have to think about the love that I have for God. Is it a means to an end or it's an end itself? Among the different loves that I have in life, where does love for God fit into it? And so all these questions Narada will address as we go further. And it gives us a good insight into this force called love, how it manifests in our life, and how it can transform us, how it can transform the world around us. There is a lot to study as we go forward. So please read the commentary that is given before we meet next week. So if you have any thoughts, ideas, questions, feel free to ask.
So Swamiji, you mentioned that the path of bhakti that is kind of parallel to the four paths of the Buddha. So in the fourth path of the Buddha, they actually enumerate multiple things that you need to do in order to practice the removal of suffering, the Buddhist path. In bhakti, is there a similar enumeration of things?
Yeah, in the fourth truth, Buddha said that's that eightfold path that bhakti gave. Oh yes.
So there's also a path for bhakti's followers.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Not just a path, several versions of it. Yeah.
So Swamiji, you mentioned that there's selfless love, selfish love of God, and I assume that, I'll take myself as an example, I may have selfish love of God. What could be ways that I can elevate my selfish love of God into selfless love of God?
Well, that's what practice means. That's what spiritual practice means. In fact, see, if you already have an completely selfless love for God, if there is no self at all, then we are already enlightened. Then you don't even need to practice this. We don't even need this book. So the fact that we are undertaking this book as spiritual seekers assumes, surely there is this self, there is this awareness of the body and mind, but there is also the awareness that there is something more deeper in life than just catering to the demands of my body and mind. There is also the awareness that I am not fully satisfied with the way life is. I need to find a deeper purpose, a deeper meaning. And approaching that spiritual ideal, no matter how we see it, approaching God, loving God, would make things clearer for me. So there is this me involved. The beauty is this, that the more love intensifies, this self kind of goes in the background. You see that, you can see, for instance, the classical example that they often give is of with a mother with a child. Let's say if the mother is all alone in a room, and maybe if a dog comes, suddenly the mother may be very afraid. If the dog starts barking, some people are very afraid of dogs. So that mother will like try to run away from there. But let's say if the mother is with a baby right in front. At that time, the mother's love for the baby transcends her limited notions of her own personal safety. That time the mother then will not even be thinking of the self. It will be all about, here is my baby and I'm going to protect my baby, right? So that's what happens. So love has this power. When we, in the beginning, and you can see that to lesser or greater degree, in all relationships that we have, in the beginning, if they're two strangers, they both are fully aware of the self. Then when love brings them together, they start thinking about each other more and more. And as that love kind of culminates, becomes very intense, in the highest sense of love, even among the human relationships that we have, would be the object of my love, the happiness of the object of my love is more important to me than my own happiness. So there again, how intense, the more intense love becomes, the idea of self automatically goes away. And same thing will happen with God also. Yeah.
So Swamiji, I think you mentioned in this lecture, but also before, that love is not a feeling. So if that's the case, then there's no difference between love and knowledge. They're exactly the same thing. And then, so why such a big distinction between Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga?
I would say there is no distinction. I mean, distinction, of course there is distinction. There is and there is not. There isn't. I mean, we are clearly using a different terminology. There is clearly a different way of approaching. But the ultimate result that occurs, whether you are going through the path of bhakti or knowledge, the ultimate result will be one and the same. That's how Vedanta sees it.
But then Swamiji, but even then the way is not different, because let's say that somebody is very passionate about the Advaitic ideal, but he has bhakti, so to speak.
Again, I mean, right? A lot of it would depend on definitions. Some people see bhakti or love for God essentially as a love towards a personal form of God. You see, for instance, loving a person is different from loving your iPhone, let's say. Right? When iPhone, well, so far at least, hasn't become a person. And so there is a kind of a personal element involved, you see. And so that's according to some. But then it's also possible, Shankaracharya, for instance, in the Viveka Chudamani, he defines bhakti as a single-minded exploration into one's own true nature. So there is not really a very personal element involved there. So again, it's a matter of definition. If you would want to see it as one, I have no objection. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Vivek and then Irina.
Pranam Swamiji. One of the things I'm really interested to see is sort of what I would say almost an interesting contradiction of bhakti, that those who follow the path of devotion, whether it be the Sufis or the Christian martyrs or the Hindu saints, they undergo incredible hardship and suffering on this path. And is it that the bhakti tremendously accelerates their unfoldment and they experience 1,000 lives of suffering at once and it's all cleared? Or, yeah, I mean, it's almost an interesting contradiction. They're all these, every other aspect of their life is mercilessly stripped away until all is left is just that.
Now, believe me, there is hardship and suffering in all yogas. Yeah.
Right.
So I
but I mean, in Bhakti, it almost seems like, the more intense the love, sometimes the more intense the suffering.
it's possible that bhaktas are more given to expressing it openly, how they feel. but there is hardship everywhere. Yeah.
Swamiji, just for me, for many years, love went along with attachment. And before I went on, spiritual path, and before I learned what is abhyasa and vairagya, what is practice and what is detachment. So, and that's like the major thing that I'm really grateful for is that, as you mentioned multiple times during the lecture today, is that the true love is not when your ego is in the center, it's about, the happiness of the other person. So it's, I think, a very, it's like the highest form of love. And as in the second sutra of the Narada, the one that we just read, in the commentary that I have, it says that the devotion and love to God is an absolute attachment. So it's like the highest form, and probably the only form of attachment that is technically allowed, because other than that...
well, that's why it's qualified with the word absolute.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how, as we all think about our husbands, wives, relatives, mothers, daughters, it's so this attachment... So we have to love them independently and practice, being not that attached, which is very hard. So, but I think that's the central practice here of love and non-attachment. So,
Very good. Yeah. You wanted to ask? Did you want to ask something?
No, I was just going to ask you. From Ramayana, you see a lot of different bhakta and. Like Sabri and some of the things, but they have very different way of getting to that love to God. And what is that difference from somebody who is enlightened and conscious comparatively? Because Sabri was not an educated person, but she was so loved to God.
That is, I see, the less educated you are, the more easy it is to love. Sometimes knowledge can kind of drive one's heart so much. It can be so, I don't know. But we really can't generalize about it. But I think these ideas will come as we go forward. We'll study that, yeah.
Swamiji, just a slightly different question. You have suggested to study the commentary of Swami Tyagananda Ji Maharaj. For a long time, he was very reluctant to publish his commentary, and he mentioned it's kind of like superficial. Is there any reason why he...
Well, part of it was because this was not a book that he wrote. These were the talks that he had given, which were then transcribed and then edited, and then he went through the text. But always the rules of speaking and the rules of writing are different. And that's why he was initially, and then when it was... everyone urged him that no, this is in its present form. It's very valuable, and then he agreed to it. Yeah. No, he was such a profound scholar, and he just wanted that everything should be perfectly accurate. And when you are kind of giving an extempore talk, sometimes some of these accuracy could get compromised. Of course, later on this was thoroughly edited, so this is good as it is, but it's quite possible, and I think quite natural, that if these, instead of these being transcripts of the talks edited, if he had written it, this would have looked very different. To some extent, if you want to get an idea, if you have Swami Vivekananda's complete works with you, you can see in the I think it is in the third volume of the complete works, you have Swami Vivekananda's Bhakti Yoga. And even there is a separate standalone book called Bhakti Yoga. Now that book, most of it is actually articles that Swami Vivekananda wrote. So that's his writing. In the complete works itself, I think in volume 4, and it's also a standalone book called Religion of Love. are the talks that Swami Vivekananda gave on the same subject. And you can see similar topics being addressed, where one is his writing and the other are his talks. And while the content is not, the ideas are not different, the way the ideas are presented, it does make a difference. Because as I say, the rules of speaking and the rules of writing are different. Yeah. Yeah, Sika.
Swamiji, at the starting you mentioned about atha, that are we eligible or capable of reading this book, or how do we judge about that? Like whether I am ready for it, or who is going to judge?
Do you feel like reading it? Do you want to study it? I think the most important thing is wanting to do it. And once you want to do it, how much we get out of it, how much we are able to understand, will depend on how much clarity we have already acquired. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. The desire has to be there. Then once, with whatever little understanding I have, with whatever little I can get out of this book, if I then use my determination to practice it, that effect of sincerity and earnestness and practice will increase the clarity. With that increased clarity, again I read the same text, more meaning will come out of it. Then I further practice it. More clarity, more reading, further practice. So it's kind of, it goes side by side. So the primary thing is whether I want to do it. And if I want to do it, do it. And then find out for yourself how it impacts you. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah. I wish there was some external instrument to kind of judge. Unfortunately, there isn't. Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop here today, and then we'll resume this study next Wednesday. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So on Sunday we celebrate Durga Puja. The puja will begin at 10:30. As always, there will be music, flower offering, worship, and prasad. So all of you are welcome. 10:30 on Sunday. Saturday we will not have meditation because we have to get ready for the puja on Sunday. Next week, Tuesday meditation is held as usual, and of course we'll have the bhakti study also. Let's conclude with a prayer on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.